Welcome to Midlife Mix.
Am I your first Canadian podcast?
Oh my God. And they say you always remember your first.
Both things can be true.
He's cheating on you. He's busting up your barbershop.
Welcome, John Nachlinger, to Midlife Mix.
Nice to be here.
So, John, you're the founder of a divorce firm called NetSquire, but you also have a podcast called Get Divorced Without Getting Screwed. And I find you very interesting because your particular mandate is to help men in divorce, yes?
That is correct.
So do you think there's a double standard when it comes to divorce between men and women? Like, is society more sympathetic to a woman?
Well, if you ask men, it definitely is. But I'd say in general, it's all a perception issue. It's the way that men and women come into divorce differently. I mean, obviously, it used to be very biased against men when we deal with custody. Mothers tended to have the upper hand always when you came to deciding where kids are going to live with, particularly younger kids. That has eroded significantly. Those biases are not existing the way that they were before. I mean, certainly judges have a lot of ability to do whatever they think is whatever they think should happen in any given case. So some people still have those old mindsets. But in general, the law certainly is gender blind. And so it really comes back to perception. So, I always say, do you feel like you're going to get, if you feel like you're going to get screwed in a divorce, you probably will, because you've already developed that mindset that perhaps as a man, I'm going to get screwed. So one of the most important things with men is just for them to understand that no, whether you're going to get screwed or not is something that is subjective to you. It's not like all men get screwed. It is something that there's just a perception out there that a lot of men do get screwed because men typically pay alimony. Children typically are with mothers a little bit more than men, but it's not because they're women. It might be because men have different careers than women have. So I guess to answer your question, yes, there is a perception out there, but it's not really grounded in anything real other than just what we've always thought over the years about men and women going through divorce.
I think it's definitely part of the narrative that's out there. Like when you talk to a divorce guy, depending on how it went, right? Like it all depends on how the divorce went. If it was fair and everybody was sort of, amicable, then you don't really hear it as much. But then you also do hear the narrative like, oh, I got screwed in this divorce. I have to pay her all this money. But maybe the money that they have to pay is actually, fair and based on salary and whatnot. But maybe the narrative is that it's unfair because simply that they have to pay it.
Well, that's exactly what it is. I mean, whenever someone has to pay alimony or spousal support, separate maintenance, whatever it's called, wherever you're listening to this, there's a perception that that's unfair. Why do I have to give someone part of my money after I'm divorced? Not recognizing that you built a marriage together, that you built this standard of living together, and that there are reasons why we don't just cut people off after, being married for so many years and being supported and being reliant upon someone else's income. We don't want them to just all of a sudden be homeless. We want there to be a transitional period between the end of the marriage and them being able to get back on their feet and move on. And by the way, there's a lot of women who pay alimony now too. It is becoming more and more common for women to pay alimony to their husbands, which you can probably guess drives our female clients insane. But it's sort of like the reverse bias, right? Because, men are like, why do I have to pay alimony? Well, women feel it even worse. Because there's a perception that men can go out and make, money easily. So why do I have to pay him any money? So it's interesting that it's happening both ways now. But alimony is really not the bigger issue. The bigger issue is retirement accounts. We see this a lot with people in law enforcement, military, people who have built these pensions that they feel they've earned through the particular thing that they've done. Being out in the line of fire, really working hard to get these pensions, and then they realize, oh, I have to split this pension with my spouse. And so I feel like that is even a tougher pill to swallow for most men than even alimony, because alimony will terminate in most cases at some point. Those issues, I mean, if it's a pension, that's forever. You're going to be giving a part of your pension forever to your spouse, and that really chaps a lot of guys' hides.
So when we talk about different types of resources for men during divorce, I feel like that's one of the reasons why you started what's called Divorce Shield. So can you tell me why you created Divorce Shield and what it's all about?
So during the pandemic, when we were all sort of even more isolated than I think most people just are in general these days, given the way technology is, it became very obvious to me that there were not a lot of resources for men who were going through divorce. I mean, a lot of men in general have a hard time with male friendships, talking to other people about what's going on in their personal life. Men are suspicious of therapy. They really don't like to, look outward for help. We all hear the joke that men won't ask for directions. I mean, it's true because it applies to everything. So in seeing this, I recognized that there needs to be a safe space for men to come. And I was shocked to see that there really weren't any, Facebook groups or anything for men going through a divorce where, there were no women there, where men could just talk to each other, complain, bitch, moan, groan, whatever they needed to do, but to actually have that outlet. And so when I recognized that didn't exist, I was like, well, what else doesn't exist? And then I started going around to coaches, divorce coaches. And I started looking around. First of all, they were almost all women. And the resources, the way the things are worded on their websites, the blogs that were written, were all female focused. It was like there was an absence of people talking to men about divorce and about everything from how to prepare for divorce to what do you do whenever your spouse tells you, I want a divorce. What should your reaction be? Trying to help men understand that you can't just put your head in the sand and expect it all to go away, that there are things you need to do. So, and then more than anything, making sure that guys understand, like we started this conversation, that you do not have to get screwed in divorce, that there is a way to make sure you don't get screwed, and it's all about a mindset shift. So recognizing all of this, I created Divorce Shield just so that I could start helping men navigate divorce in a way that was very specific to them and their concerns and their concern over the bias that we were just talking about in the court system when it comes to money and children. So because of all of that, I formed this company that just sort of was something I did sort of on a whim, just to sort of do something a little bit different than just divorcing people all day, every day, which is what I had been doing for almost 20 years. And it took off so quickly, and it made me realize that there was a yearning for this kind of community out in the world. And so it's developed, it continues to grow, and we're really excited we're able to help so many men have a better divorce, if that's even something that's possible.
So when you say that, men need a mindset shift when it comes to divorce, do you often find that they walk into your office or, you have that first call and they are defeated?
Very much so. It really depends on how the divorce starts. So there are men who initiate divorce. The majority of them already have someone else. They're already in a new relationship. The majority of those guys are already in a new relationship. Those guys are a little bit easier to deal with because they're the ones making the decision. Now they have to deal with the emotional impact on their spouse. They have to understand that the divorce is going to be a little bit more difficult because of the choices they have made. But those are not really the guys that gravitate to Divorce Shield. The ones that gravitate to Divorce Shield are the ones who came home from work one day, their wife sat them down on the couch and said, I want a divorce. And they, in their own mind, are shocked and dismayed and taken, it came out of left field. I had no idea this was coming. Those are the guys that I tend to speak to the most because they're the ones that if you don't get to them soon and you don't get to them directly, they can end up in a spiral that allows the divorce to get out of control very fast because their spouse probably already has an attorney hired, is already making plans to move forward. And here they are just trying to process, why is this happening to me? So that's really the hardest thing to deal with men, is just trying to get them to figuratively smack them in the face and just say, listen, I understand you don't like this. I know this is not what you want. I know you're a good father. I know you provided for your family. You thought you did everything right. But the marriage wasn't working. For whatever reason, you're, surprised that this happened, although you shouldn't have been surprised. I'm sure your wife has told you many times this is coming and you just weren't listening, which is probably the reason why she's initiating the divorce now. But you have to get them past that. And that is very difficult because divorce is 95% emotion. If we get rid of the emotion, divorce is very simple, very simple. So, it's why in my law firm, we really focus on mediation, because if you can just get two people to say, okay, we hate each other, I don't ever want to see your face again, but we're at least committed to saving money and figuring out a process that's going to be amicable and we can at least get through this, then divorce does not become expensive, emotionally taxing, time consuming. It's very simple. So we got to tackle the emotions first before we can really get down to the business of getting people divorced.
I think there's a stat that says something like 75% of divorces are initiated by women. And just like you sort of described, a lot of men feel like they were shell-shocked, they got blindsided. So what advice would you give to men so they're not sitting ducks? So if this happens, they come home, they get the kitchen table talk, and, they might feel whatever, shocked, blindsided, or they might feel like the victim. What are the steps then when they walk into your office are you recommending them to do to move forward?
Well, if they're caught by the emotion of it and they're really spiraling into depression and going in that direction, I tell them they have to get a therapist involved. They need to talk to somebody. Or do you have a good friend that you can sit down and go have a beer with and talk to them? Go get a divorce coach, somebody, if you don't have a good friend, but you want to talk to somebody from a non-therapeutic perspective, go get a coach, somebody who can help you process this, because it is going to be very difficult to have a conversation about divorce with somebody who's emotionally spiraling, because they're not going to be objective. They're going to see everything through that emotional lens. Instead of looking at the fact that, that he makes $100,000 and his wife was a stay-at-home mom for 10 years and hasn't worked and had 4 children, they're just going to see it as, well, she wanted the divorce, so why should I give her anything? Because you cannot process objectively what's going on when you're still spiraling. So if somebody comes in and that's the mindset that they're in, I mean, obviously there might be legal issues that have to be addressed and you have to sort of, you can't just do nothing, but you really have to give them the time to understand that this is happening and to stop saying, why is this happening to me? I don't deserve this. Okay, fine. You don't deserve it. It's a bummer it's happening to you. It's horrible. But we need to get you through that. Otherwise, we can't even start talking about how should this be resolved? What would be fair in this circumstance? Because you're not going to see it. All you're going to see is, this shouldn't be happening. Why is she doing this to me? And so really, therapy is one of those things where if you don't come in with your spouse and you guys are figuratively, able to figuratively hold hands, I say that, I mean, sit down and talk next to each other and not scream at each other and get into the name calling, then you probably should have somebody to talk to who's not your attorney. Because attorneys, I know it's going to come as a shock to everyone listening to this. Attorneys are not therapists. We are not therapists. Coaches are not therapists. People that are therapists have been specially trained. So you really need to go talk to somebody to go through these feelings you're having. And then the really good part about getting into therapy for a lot of men is that you're going to learn what you did, what happened, how did you contribute to the downfall of the marriage, so that when you're in your next relationship, which I know everyone tells me I'm not going to get remarried, almost everyone does, you won't have the same issues in the next marriage. There's a reason why second marriages fail at a much higher rate than first marriages. It's because no one does any work. You don't do any work to figure out, what did I do wrong? How did I contribute to the downfall of this marriage? And men are particularly bad at that. They want to always say, well, she's the one that wanted a divorce, so, I didn't have any part to play in this. She's crazy. She's bipolar. I hear everything. Men always say their wives are bipolar. All of the wives say their men are narcissistic. I mean, I hear it. I hear it 80% of the time. So you really have to start there. And so I really try to get people into therapy, like really hard. It doesn't always work, but if they listen to me and we get them into therapy and they can resolve these issues, they can have an easy divorce. And by easy, I mean inexpensive, get through it very quickly, don't damage your kids, and keep as much money as possible in your pocket.
Have you ever had a case where, your client was the husband or the man, and, you finalize the divorce, he's fought for 50-50 custody, maybe the money, and then, down the road, you find out that, your client maybe is bailing, not picking up the kids when he's supposed to, because we hear this a lot, this happens, or maybe he's not paying their child support, and then they land back in your office asking you to help them again.
Oh yeah,
How do you deal with that?
It happened more frequently, like a decade ago. Like I think there's a generational shift happening. A lot of the fathers now that are in their 30s are much more hands-on than the guys who I divorced, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Back then, that was very common. Guys would fight for custody that then they just would not exercise. And then, here we are back. And why did they fight for that custody? Well, not to generalize, but a lot of guys fought for it because they didn't want to pay the child support that was accompanied by their ex-wives having, greater time with the kids. So in those situations, when they come back into the office, they have to understand you can't just go back and say, oh, well, I didn't, now I want to exercise the time, because kids are people. Like they understand, like what their schedule is. You can't just go in and out of your kids' lives. You can't like say, okay, I'm going to do this week, and then I'm not going to do in 2 weeks. I'm not going to do that week. I'm just going to do one day. Like it can't be like that. And so they have to understand, and I make sure they understand this before they agree to it, that you have to exercise this. This isn't like I can exercise it if I want to. This is, you have to exercise it. And if you don't, then your ex-spouse will come back into their attorney's office, and we're going to be looking at you paying more child support and maybe modifying the schedule permanently. So it just comes back to, and this is all about setting expectations from day one, which attorneys in general are very bad at doing. You've got attorneys that tell their clients what they want to hear. Oh yeah, we're definitely going to get that for you. Oh yeah, you definitely want to pay alimony. Oh yeah, you're definitely going to get 50-50 custody of your kids, whatever it is. You've got to set expectations from day one of what's realistic, and then make sure that you understand your client's goals, and you have to make sure that they understand what their goals are. Like I always ask the question, why are you asking for that? Give me a reason, and don't. This isn't like like your parent telling a child because I told you so. That's not acceptable. Like you need to give me a concrete reason. If you're saying you want 50-50 custody of your kids, then explain to me how your schedule, with your work schedule and your commute and everything that you have, you can actually do this. Because if they can't explain why, then I try to talk them out of even asking for it because of that very reason. Because what's going to happen is they will end up not doing it. And now down the road, we're going to have a second litigation dealing with how we modify support and custody.
Like I know you mentioned that, lawyers aren't therapists. But when you're talking about children, do you have any advice for husbands and men about how they can maintain the relationship with their children post-divorce?
Yeah, actually, I start working with men before the divorce is even finished to address this exact issue. One of the things that I work with guys in Divorce Shield on is protecting their kids from the standpoint of protecting the relationship between them and their children. And it starts with little things like, do you know who your children's best friends are? Have you met their parents? Do you know who their teachers are? Do you know like what their morning schedule is like? Do they eat breakfast? Like if you have I have a 12-year-old girl who has to take an hour to get ready now, like, makeup and hair and all this stuff. Do you know what they eat, what they don't eat? Like you have to make sure that you even know your child. And that starts with making sure you know all those things as quickly as possible. And you might say, well, why should you be asking for, significant custody of a child? We don't know those things. Well, during a marriage, we divide labor in different ways. Like it might be that, husband leaves early for work and gets home early and maybe isn't as familiar with the morning routine as mom is. After a divorce, everyone's going to be doing everything. So what's really important, I'd say this is important for men and women, is that you need to make sure you fully understand your child's day, their life, everything in it, so that you're not always shocked when you learn new information about your child. It happens very frequently that I'll talk to fathers who are very upset about like the way their daughters are dressed or the way that their sons play too much video games. And I always remind them, like, well, what was going on during the marriage? And half the time I hear, well, I don't know. I guess they were doing that. I don't really know. And so now they don't know their child well enough. So in order to get back to your question, in order to have that good relationship with them post-divorce, you have to know your child. You just have to know your child. Custody is not about just possession. It's not like, oh, I have my kid. It's being a parent. It's being a parent in every way, recognizing that there's going to be things that you're going to go through. Particularly, if you're a father, if you have a girl that's, going through the teenage years, there's certain things that, as a single father, you're going to need to make sure you're educated about so that you understand. If you're a mother with a boy, you're going to have to also educate yourself about what boys go through, especially through puberty in their teenage years. So there's certain things that, as parents, we forget that we need to educate ourselves on, because during a marriage, you have somebody else that maybe knows things that you don't know about your children, and you can kind of bounce off of each other. So in order to protect that relationship, you have to get to know your kids. You have to understand their schedule. You have to understand their strengths and weaknesses, and you have to be fully supportive. And then co-parenting is the next part of this. You've got to be a good co-parent with their other parent. Don't talk bad about them. Don't talk bad about them anywhere in your house. I love how people say, well, I was in my bedroom, as though like kids can't go up to your door and listen to what you're saying. It's humorous to me, but there's a lot of things you can do to protect your kids and your relationship with them. But it starts with before you even get divorced. Make sure you don't have a big fight. I don't understand why people think if they have a big divorce fight with your children's other parent, that's going to do anything but potentially damage the relationship. So it starts pre-divorce, and then after divorce, you just have to make sure you're fully educated on your children, make sure you are being responsive to them, and you're actually parenting and not just, coming home and seeing that they're in your house and not even talking to them.
So you mentioned on your site that going through your own divorce inspired Divorce Shield. So what did you learn through your own divorce process?
So what's interesting is before Divorce Shield started, I started a podcast, Get Divorced Without Getting Screwed. And it was really just, my marriage was kind of unraveling, and I had an outlet that I wanted to just, start talking to people about various things. And really what had happened was, as I was interviewing experts and as I was talking to people and as I was really doing this podcast, I finally one day looked in the mirror and was like, I'm literally the person that my podcast is talking to about, you need to make a decision. You can't just stay miserable forever. We only live once. And so that's what first pushed me to start the divorce process. And then as part of that, I recognized that there were other men out there that were probably just like me, who were going through a very similar thing. They just thought being miserable is just part of being a guy in a marriage, like that we're not entitled to be happy, that we're not entitled to want a better relationship with the person that we're married to. So in doing that, I recognized that even I have a lot of friends that I talk to about personal stuff all the time. But even I felt a little isolated where I couldn't talk about my marriage. And I was like, there's got to be a lot of other guys out there that are just like me. So that's what really helped me, look at what do I need to do to make sure that there are other guys out there don't feel isolated anymore. And then that's where Divorce Shield sort of generated from. In terms of the name, I think when I first started it, I was thinking, like giving guys sort of a protection from all of the biases and all of the things that are out there that they're going to hear, so that they can really try to figure out what's most important to get through the process. So that shield, that kind of like invisible barrier of all the noise that they're going to hear. And that's really where it all started.
You're quoted online as saying, "Men do not have to feel alone during a divorce. I want to give every man the plays he needs to execute during all parts of divorce and come out the other side ready to tackle the quarter in the game of life." What does that mean?
Well, I like to talk to guys in sports metaphors all the time because most men understand that. I mean, even when I'm talking about, whenever I'm operating as a coach, I really talk about almost like being a basketball coach, to understand that I'm showing them like a play for them to go do. Like I'm trying to outline what they should go do, but they're the ones that have to live their life. They're the ones that have to go out and do it. I can't hold your hand. And I also look at, you can call it chapters. With men, I usually say like quarters or innings or something like that. But you're in a quarter of a game right now. It's going to be over at some point, and you're going to start a new one. And the new one is a fresh start. Anyone going through a divorce needs to understand that the next chapter of your life is a fresh start. I mean, yes, if you're co-parenting, there's going to be some things from your last chapter that still go forward. But with men, it's if you do the right things and you really focus on what's really important, then the next chapter of your life can be very different. It can be very different in all respects. You can find a better relationship that's better for you. You can be a better father to your children than maybe you were during the marriage. You can even probably make more money, which is something that I talk to guys about all the time when they complain about alimony. I'm like, do you recognize that being miserable is absolutely a drag on your ability to build wealth and to actually make money? Because, you feel like you have to do something as opposed to focusing on what you want to do and what maybe will be more fulfilling and will let you expand your life in various ways. So really, all that really is talking about is I want to make sure that they are fully prepared, not just the X's and O's of the divorce itself, but in their entire life, and focusing on mindset really in particular, so that the next chapter, the next quarter, the next inning of their life can be completely new, unique, and be much better. Because you know what? You only live once, and I don't understand how people want to be miserable forever.
Mm-hmm. I don't understand why men don't talk to other men. Like, you all have best friends. Like, why don't you open up with one another about what's really happening in your marriage or your feelings? Like, why do they need Divorce Shield versus just going out with a beer with their buddy and like just chatting it out?
Isn't that amazing? I cannot agree with you more. But think of it like this: there's three different kinds of areas in our country. We've got our urban areas, the suburban areas, and rural areas. In the urban areas, I think a lot of guys do talk to each other. There's a lot more of camaraderie. It depends on where you live in the country too. Like guys in New York and LA, they're much more able and open to talk to their friends about what's going on in their lives. Second, you get to more like suburban areas where it's much more, you're in areas where people talk a lot more because there's just, maybe you're in a smaller community. And that actually goes even more so for rural areas. Men start to not want to talk about their personal life as much because, it might get back to their wives, or it might get back to this person, or it might get back to that person. And men by nature aren't very emotional when they're around their guy friends anyway. Although, again, I say generationally, it is changing. I mean, you look at the under 30 crowd, they operate very differently than like the over 50 crowd. In between, it kind of depends. But, like the over 50 crowd, I don't think those guys don't ever want to be seen crying in front of anybody. Whereas the guys that are like under 30, they're like kissing each other on the cheek and like hugging each other and stuff. The world is changing. So I think to some degree this will change over time. But if you're in a small town and everyone knows you and everyone knows your wife, even your best friend, like why you don't want to talk to them. You're just going to feel uncomfortable having those kinds of conversations because you may feel like, okay, this is my one friend. I don't want to blow that friendship because his wife's best friends with my wife. There's a lot of dynamics that are going on. So I think that to answer your question, I think it really is one of those things where generationally men are different, but also where you live really plays a big part. And that's why Divorce Shield, I'd say probably 80% of the guys in Divorce Shield either live in a rural area, they live or they live in a community that's sort of close-knit, like a religiously close-knit community, or somewhere where they don't feel like they can really talk to anybody about what's going on for fear that it's going to get back to their spouse.
So what gaps do you see in support or information for men going through divorces that you want to address?
Well, I want them to understand that they don't have to feel like they're getting screwed. I mean, that is like first and foremost. And I think that what they really need to understand is that they need to be part of a community. I mean, you don't have to be part of my community. You just need to find a community to be part of. It doesn't have to be in like an online forum. Go find, a new group to join. Go join people that you have not normally associated with so that you have an outlet to talk about what's going on in your life away from your normal everyday life so that you can start to feel comfortable talking to somebody. And obviously, if it's other people going through a divorce, that's really a good thing too. But you really need to understand, all men need to understand, women need to understand this too, that your attorney is there for a purpose. The purpose is to give you advice on how to legally end your marriage. They're not there to be your friend. They're not there to be your therapist. They're not there for you to email every single day and complain about this text message that you got and was nasty. You need to recognize roles. And whenever you're going through a divorce, sometimes you need a team of people. But you need to recognize who you personally need on your team to get you through this process. And it very well could be that all you need is an attorney because you've got everything else figured out. But if you need somebody to help you deal with emotions, if you need somebody to help you figure out what your next chapter of your life is going to look like, if you need a group of people that you've never met before that are outside of your community so that you can maybe interact with them, do activities with them and talk to them, you need to figure out who you need on your team from day one. And I think that is more important than anything because what do most people do? They go run to an attorney. And most attorneys are just people that like to what we call litigate. So most attorneys, they have this cookie cutter thing that they do when people come in for a divorce. They just immediately file something and sort of let the chips fall where they may, which is really a bad approach for most people. So before you even do any of that, you have to figure out who needs to be on your team, who you really need to have access to, and then figure out what kind of legal process is going to be best for you and your family. And so there's sort of step-by-step process you need to go through. Most people don't. And then if you don't, that's when you hear of these stories. And in my law firm, these stories are real, and I see them all the time, of people whose divorces take years and cost sums of money that would make your eyes bulge. But and it's all because people don't address their emotional needs at the very beginning. And so they let the divorce process be their emotional outlet, and they let their divorce attorney be everything. Their therapist, their friend, their confidant, the only person they're talking to about anything going on in their life. And that is something, if you're about to go through a divorce, man or woman, you need to be clear at the very beginning. What do you actually need in order to feel supported during this process so that you can have a better divorce?
In your experience, how does divorce impact men's mental health and identity?
Well, if they are not the ones initiating, which, as you point out before, most of the time women are initiating, they may not be the ones filing in court, because sometimes men want to go file after, they've been told that they're getting divorced for, manly reasons. But beyond that, they really just need to, men and women, everyone needs to understand that divorce is something that doesn't happen to you. And everyone sort of looks at divorce happening to me. This is happening to me. It's almost like you have no control over anything going on in your life. I didn't choose this, so this is happening to me. When you get married, we all know about 50% of marriages end in divorce. It's just, that's the fact. Now, what's interesting is that figure, the number of people getting divorced is coming down because fewer people are getting married. That's a whole different conversation for a different day. But fewer people are getting married, and people are getting married later in life. Those two things are helping to contribute to fewer divorces. But if you're a betting person, if you get married, unfortunately, there's probably close to a 50-50 chance that your marriage won't survive. And it's not because you shouldn't get married. It's not because there's not love going on. It's just because life changes and people change. We all, as we grow up, people change. I know in my personal life, one of the things that really contributed to my divorce was I started doing a lot of personal development work, getting mindset coaches and really working on myself, trying to get through all the barriers that were preventing me from doing the things I wanted to do. My spouse did none of that, was suspicious of all of that, thought that it was all a waste of money, wasn't willing to do anything to improve. And that's not tenable. Like at some point, you're not going to get to a place where the marriage works anymore. So I think just understanding that divorce is, for lack of a better way of saying it, it's a part of life, that just it happens, and not looking at it as a failure, not looking at it as somebody else's fault. That is the most important thing for everyone going through a divorce to recognize. Is just, you don't have to like it. You don't have to, you don't have to be smiling about it. It doesn't have to be a happy time, but you need to stop being a victim. People just are too big at being a victim. And if you stop being a victim and you start focusing on what's most important, coming up with goals, and then most importantly, trying to figure out what that next chapter, that next quarter of your life is going to look like, you'll get through a divorce. You'll get through it very well. And most importantly, if you have kids, you're doing it for your children. If you don't want to do something for yourself, do it for your kids. And that's how I always phrase it to all my clients. I don't care if you like this, but can you at least put in the work so that your kids have a better experience?
If 50% of first marriages fail, and we know that statistically, second marriages have an even higher divorce rate, why do we keep doing it, do you think? Why do we keep getting married?
I think marriage feels just socially the thing that you need to do. I will say too, from a legal perspective, marriage has a lot of benefits. When you're with somebody and you're married, you don't have to have a lot of extra paperwork. Now, for example, if you're just living with your boyfriend or girlfriend and they get into the hospital and you're not married and you haven't done a lot of different documents, you might have no ability to even visit your boyfriend or girlfriend, let alone make decisions for them, even if you've been together for 20 years, because the law really is geared towards rewarding marriage. And it always has been, it always will probably do that. Everything from the tax code to just the legalities of, what happens when you die. It's all revolves around marriage. So there's so many legal benefits to marriage, some of which can be achieved through powers of attorney and a bunch of other things. But there's a lot of really legal reasons why marriage is important, even more so if you have children, that if you combine that with just historical and religious overtones of marriage, people just have a tendency to want marriage. And plus, you're legally connected to somebody. It's almost like it ties you even more to somebody. And so I think because of that, we all just keep wanting to get married again. But I will tell you, I said this earlier, everyone tells me I'm never getting married again. Everybody. Like when I start talking to them about, okay, well, if we need to look at this part of your agreement because if you get married again, oh, no, 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 I'm never getting married again. I hear it all the time, and the fact of the matter is, you probably will get married again. I don't know. It's interesting. I forget what the stats are now, but it's like 60 or 70% of second marriages fail. And third marriages, it's even worse. It's like some people just keep getting married, and at some point they stop. But I really feel like too the success rate of the second marriage depends on how long the first marriage was as well. There's some people that were married for like 2 years. I don't know about you, but I had back in my 20s, I feel like I was going to a wedding every other week. Grew up in Texas. Everyone gets married young in Texas, compared to like up in New Jersey where I am now, where people are getting married in their late 30s, like and not starting to have kids until they're in their late 30s, which is so. It's really interesting, like how those dynamics also dictate the success and failures of marriages too. Because in my friends in Texas, I mean, practically 75% of them were divorced because they got married too young. They got married before they knew who they were. They got married before they knew what their careers were. They were having kids while they were still, kids themselves in a lot of ways. And so, marriage is a very dynamic thing, but I think we all want that sense of security that we're with somebody. And then, like I said, everything else in society sort of rewards the fact that people are married.
So what advice would you, and I'm going to ask you what your advice is to the men, since, that's your mandate, is to help men in divorce. What advice would you give a husband so they don't end up in your office?
From the coaching perspective, I would just say if you join a community and you just consume enough information about the things you need to do, you don't actually need to work one-on-one with somebody. The problem here is that really that is requiring someone to self-select and to like be able to look at themselves in the mirror and decide what it is they need. And that's the one thing men are really bad at. Men are really bad at even recognizing that they need help. Asking for help is something that men are very bad at doing. So it's very hard to tell somebody, well, if you do these things, you won't end up in my office. Now, if we're talking about like just saving a marriage in general, that's a whole different story. I really wish that when people got married, two things were required. One is that they had to, well, actually three things. One is that they had to live together for a period of time. I would prefer at least a year before they can even get married. Two is that everyone should have to have a prenup. And the reason for that, it's not necessarily legal, is so that you have to have a conversation about money before you get married, because most divorces originate around money. People think divorce originates around infidelity. No, it's money. Money and trust. Those are the two big issues with divorce. And three, it's to actually communicate. I mean, people have forgotten how to communicate. I mean, people go to bed now, I'm sure, two spouses are sitting on the sides of the bed just on their phones, as opposed to talking. Like, what happened in your day? If something annoys you about your spouse, you should feel comfortable like talking to them. And these are all things before you get married you should address, but while you're married, you've got to remember communication is important. And guys are so bad about communicating. They need to learn to listen. They need to learn to be non-judgmental. They need to learn to not get mad easily, because I feel like everyone just gets so irritated all the time about everything now. And you need to establish something that's going to allow you and your spouse that connection time. If you have kids, we all know how difficult it is when you have kids to have connection time. It's the one date a week, or, having an hour before bed every night with no devices and talking. These things sound so basic, but over the years, I've just seen like, if there's certain things that you just do, you probably won't get divorced. You just probably won't, because you are working on your marriage throughout. When do people work on their marriage? You know this. When their marriage is basically already over. That's when they start working on it. That's when they go to marriage counseling. You go to marriage counseling when, oh my gosh, this is our last ditch effort to save our marriage. Well, it might be too late then. At some point, it's too late. So before people get married, I really wish they came and watched a divorce, or they had to have some kind of pre-marriage counseling like they do in some religions. Like there needs to be a little bit more of a conscious effort before you say I do, to make sure that that is really the good situation for you, because I think we're all guided by love. And love's not a bad thing, but marriage is also a legal issue. It's legal. So you can love somebody and never get married to them, but once you say I do, you're binded to them legally, and there are consequences if that relationship doesn't work. So, I know I went all over the place in answering your question, but the fact of the matter is, there's no excuse for being surprised by divorce. It's all around us. It happens all the time. And the reasons for divorce are pretty much stereotypical. Like I've personally, as an attorney, I've handled almost 2,000 divorces myself. And the reasons for divorce are very similar. It doesn't matter culture. It doesn't matter age. It doesn't matter anything. They're all very similar, and they're all predictable. In fact, I bet if I went back and I looked at everyone that I've divorced, if I went back and looked at them 5 years ago and just watched a day in their life, you could have easily predicted they were going to get divorced. I mean, it's not rocket science. And so because of that, before you get married, you got to work on the relationship. And then during the marriage, you got to work on it every single day, because things are going to happen that are going to test you every single day. This past year, or last year, when we had the last presidential election, I actually had a raft of divorces tied to husbands and wives having such different opinions about politics, which I know sounds so simple, but it goes back to what you expect out of life and having those conversations before you get married to make sure that you at least want similar things out of life. You can disagree with your spouse on politics or, anything. You can support different sports teams. And like up here, I know I've got people that are like Giants and Eagles fans or Mets and Yankees fans. Okay, fine. Those are things you can work through. But again, talk about it before you get married. Don't let things like that get in the way. Because I think in our law firm, we probably divorced at least 15 people that were directly related to our last presidential election. And it's insane, but it happened. And, if you just talk before you get married, you'll hopefully alleviate some of those issues.
And to end this podcast, if you could give your clients, or what do you give your clients, if you had to give them one piece of advice or one tip on how to survive the divorce process as a guy, what would you tell them?
Don't do it alone. Don't do it alone. Again, it doesn't matter whether it's a group, an online group, it's a good friend that you finally can confide in. If it's a divorce coach that you hire and you pay, it's a therapist that you go get somebody who's not your attorney to talk to while you're going through this process. And actually talk to them. Schedule a call every week and talk to them. Do something with them every week and talk to them. And just unload your emotions. Unload what you're feeling so that you can get it out of your body, out of your system, and you can focus on your divorce. Do not turn to substances. So many guys develop alcohol problems, drug problems during divorce. And if you are legitimately depressed, go see somebody to help you get yourself out of that. But don't do this alone. And when I say don't do it alone, your attorney doesn't count. Your attorney, I'm exempting out your attorney. Someone other than your attorney is what I'm talking about when I say don't do this alone.
Good. Well, thank you so much, John, for taking the time to speak with me. This was a very valuable conversation that I think will help a lot of people out there.
I appreciate the time.
Thank you.